I actually would like to start by welcoming all the participants to today's session. And we are really happy to see that we've got so many participants joining this important session. So you've already received the instructions and the procedure around participations from Marcus, so we will not go over that anymore. We will go straight into our first part of this webinar, which is going to be opened up with important remarks from Ms. Gillian Triggs, the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection at UNHCR. And then we will be also hearing other opening remarks from Mr. Abbas Karimi, the Paralympian refugee athlete and the UNHCR high-profile supporter. Before we do that, I would like to let you know that we will be sharing all the bios of the speakers in the chat box just to avoid losing time. So please look at the chat box if you want to know more about our speakers throughout the panels. We are also inviting all the participants to address any questions through the Q&A instead of the chat. Questions will be responded to the same channel, so that is through the Q&A. So with that, I would like to start and ask the respected Ms. Gillian Triggs to actually give us the opening remarks, and then followed by Mr. Abbas Karimi. Thank you, Ms. Triggs.
Well, thank you very much, Najiba, and welcome everybody to this side event as part of the high-level officials meeting, which, as you know, is taking place tomorrow and the following day. The subject for this side event is the meaningful refugee participation. And we mean meaningful. It's not just a slogan, it's something that UNHCR takes very seriously indeed. And I look forward to the discussions that we're going to have about what that means in practice. It's not just an abstract idea. And perhaps we could begin with, in fact, one of the purposes of the high-level officials meeting, of course, which is to examine the extent to which the Global Compact on Refugees of 2018 is actually being effective, the extent to which the pledges and the aspirational objectives have been met with concrete examples. And I might then remind us all that the Compact itself identifies refugees and their communities as a key stakeholder group, and that comprehensive responses to forced displacement, whether internally or externally, are most effective when they're actively and meaningfully engaging the affected populations. And in clearer language, it's nothing about us without us. And by that, we mean refugees, asylum seekers, people internally displaced, stateless people, must all be a part of the work that is being done under the principles of the Global Compact on Refugees, most particularly, of course, the equitable sharing of responsibilities and burdens for displaced people. Well, why is it so important to include affected people? Well, one is that very often organizations that are led by forcibly displaced people are the first responders in humanitarian situations. And you'll all be aware that the Secretary General of the United Nations has asked us to stay and deliver. And UNHCR has tried with our 530 operations globally to ensure that we have met that obligation. And our colleagues, and I'm very proud to be able to say that our colleagues have done this to a very significant degree, COVID notwithstanding. But importantly, the first responders, including organizations led by forcibly displaced people, are and have been staying and delivering in the fullest sense. They don't run away when the contract finishes or the money runs out. They are working for their own people in a very, very effective way. They also understand better what it is that communities in need of protection actually require. They're key actors in providing that support to crisis-affected people. Of course, refugee-led organizations have been particularly important in the context of COVID, and we know that they've ensured the continuity of services. The UNHCR is of course, very keen to continue to develop our work at the local and community level, and it's part of our decentralization and regionalization process. But although there aren't many silver linings to COVID, at least it can be acknowledged that COVID has told us in a way that almost nothing else could have done why it's so important, one, for us to work together, but secondly, that we must work at the local level where refugee-led organizations are so powerful. The role of refugee-led organizations has been recognized in the 2020 UNHCR NGO Innovation Award, and that highlights the degree to which refugee-led groups are using innovation creatively to meet the needs of their own communities. So thank you very much for that work. And can I perhaps point out, and it is relevant, that this event itself has been co-developed and organized and run with the valuable support and expertise of the Interim Advisory Group for Refugee-Led Organizations. Now, that group is, as I say, interim, and it's very much hoped that before much longer, we will have a permanent or fully established advisory group that will help to bring refugee-led organizations together from around the world so that we can give much more coherence globally to their work. In the meantime, we have a cross-team, a cross-divisional team that's working on engagement with our partners and with other organizations for refugees and displaced people. That was created in 2020, and it is working hard with the interim advisory team to set things in place for next year. But nonetheless, a number of things have already been happening. And one, and I'm very pleased to be able to discuss this, is the grant agreement tool and standard operating procedures that have been piloted in 10 country operations, including Argentina, Chile, Uganda, and Switzerland. Of course, it's one thing to talk about meaningful participation of refugees, but you have to find some mechanism, some financial support to enable them to develop the capacity and to be effective. And that's what this grant agreement is designed to do. It amounts to $4,000 a year, with a maximum of 3 per year per refugee-led organization. So that's 12,000 a year, a not insubstantial sum. And I think that should get things going. As you know, that one of the purposes of the high-level officials meeting is to look at the indicator report, which will describe with evidence, qualitative and quantitative, of the extent to which the GRF pledges are being implemented. There are close to 1,600 GRF pledges, but it's perhaps a little concerning that of those 1,600 pledges made 2 years ago and over the last couple of years, only 69 of them have been made through refugee participation or refugee-led organizations. Some of them, 67%, were made by persons of concern and their organizations, by NGOs, and 17% by states. But my key point is that we would very much like to see a greater engagement by refugee-led organizations in making pledges as we move from the high-level officials meeting to the next global compact forum, which will be late, probably 2 years from now, but certainly late in 2023. We also have a refugee-led innovation fund, which engages formal and informal refugee-led organizations to allow them to establish initiatives at the local level, to link grantees through the fund to existing innovation networks, and again help to build some coherence among refugee-led organizations, their communities, and UNHCR itself. Also, another initiative that's has been created is a mapping tool, a global database of all refugee-led and led organizations that will be developed over the following year to have a much better view of what's going on at the grassroots level, regionally and globally, and again to build coherence with governments, with the private sector, to examine more effective operations through these groups. And it might map them by reference to their legal status, financial status, their relationships with their communities, their funding sources, and their governing bodies, and how they go about it. So I think that should add to our information, along with a definition of what a refugee-led organization is, because, as you know, we use perhaps a phrase that's not very user-friendly externally, but that is persons of concern. We know what we mean by it, but I'm not sure everybody else does. But critically, we're talking about meaningful engagement, not only with refugees, asylum seekers, but also internally displaced people, and the countless numbers, the unknown numbers of people who are stateless and need international protection. I'm very pleased to use these opening remarks to announce the launch of the 2022 Innovation Award by UNHCR and the NGO community. And this year, it's going to be dedicated to women-led organizations and girl-led organizations that are working to support refugees, internally displaced people, returnees, stateless people, and their host communities, critically their host communities as well. There will be 7 winners who'll be selected to receive a prize of 15,000 United States dollars to support their innovative work that upholds gender equality and accountability to women and girls. So I would like to suggest that you make some nominations. You can self-nominate, or you can nominate a women-led organization that you're aware of by the 15th of January. So it's about a month to go. But if you could give some thought to that, we'd be very, very grateful. And perhaps one element of this that we need to think about a little bit more for next year is how we achieve real participation when, for many refugee-led organizations, it's very difficult to be registered. Of course, the law varies from country to country, but this is often a practical limitation on their ability to be effective. And it might be also that without effective registration, they cannot have access to predictable or direct funding, and very difficult for them to develop their capacity. So it is something that we're very concerned about. And when international organizations, governments, the private sector, the donor community are thinking about pledges for inclusion of refugee people, then maybe they might think about looking also at this problem of dealing with the barriers to effective participation, which we would very much like to respond to as we think about this next year. Can I also ask you, for those of you who will be interested in joining a multi-stakeholder coalition on meaningful participation, which will be led by refugee-led organizations and governments and states, if you wouldn't mind including your name and country and organization and contact details on a form which we're including in the chat. Because again, what we're trying to do is to build the global community of refugee-led organizations that allow the coalition to be more effective with meaningful participation. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm so delighted by the very significant numbers of people who are with us. And I look forward to a very fruitful discussion. So if I may, then back to you, Najiba.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gillian. Before I go to our next speaker for the opening remarks, can I remind all the participants to once again use the chat box, to either put comments or raise any questions, and we will try to get them answered through the Q&A as well. So please use that as a way to intervene or put your inputs and contribution. So with that, I would like to welcome Abbas Karimi, a Paralympian refugee athlete and UNHCR high-profile supporter.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Abbas Karimi. I'm a refugee from Afghanistan, and I'm a member of a refugee Paralympic team. I'm a Paralympic swimmer and a high-profile supporter for UNHCR. I was born in Afghanistan, and I lived in Afghanistan for 16 years. And in that 16 years, most of the year I start, living with through the sport. As a kid, I always wanted to jump in the water, and I was going to rivers with my friends, and that's how I got encouragement to do some activity, because I was very energetic kid. So as a kid I got bullied a lot, because I didn't have arms, I have disability. But the sport always showed me the path that it can be like a shield to protect me, and it's been always protective. And I started swimming in Afghanistan, and I started competing in Afghanistan at the national level. And after that, at the age of 16, I became a refugee, and I've been in Turkey for 4 years. And in 4 years, I still didn't give up. I didn't quit, even having living as a displaced person, as a refugee. It was very, very tough. But the sport was always there for me, and I kept swimming and I kept competing. And on 4 years, I won like 15 medals at the national level, but I was not allowed to compete internationally because I didn't have any document. Then at the end of 2016, I got resettled to USA, and then I started from the bottom again. And then I made it to the international level in the 2017. And then I qualified for my first world championship in Mexico. And my first world championship, I won a silver medal, and I became the first refugee to made it to the international level at the podium in any sport. And from there, I kept competing every year internationally until this year. I made it my first Paralympic Games, and I represented the refugee Paralympic team, and I was the flag bearer, which was my happiest moment of my life, and which was my proudest moment. And then I finished. I made the final. I finished top 8 in the world, and so all the point is that the sport has always give me the power and confidence, and it makes me feel very powerful. And I believe that sport can change refugees' life and give them a lot of encouragement, and it can even save their life, like it saved my life. So, and at the end, I want to give the message that it's very important to give the refugees around the world and displaced people and refugee communities to open doors for them to the sport, so they can do sport. And if they can make it to the top level, it can by through the sport, I believe that we can make the world a better place, and we can build a relationship with the world and show the face of good face and positive face of refugees in the world. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abbas Karimi, for your opening remarks. We have a very tight time schedule, so I will need to do my best to stick with the timing. And before we actually go to our first panel, which is really about, from pledge to action, I would like to flag out that we have a diverse group of speakers today, and that it includes refugee-led organizations, NGOs, academia, the private sector, as well as the states. So the main recommendations put forward by the speakers today are really captured in the Menti, which will be really active throughout this session. So I would like to invite again all the participants to view all the recommendations and to get them to rate them by priority through the Menti at any point during this event. So you will be able to see in the chat box that the Menti link is being put along with the instructions. So again, please do look at the Menti, do view the recommendations, so you can get a chance to rate them again by the priority. And with that, we will be going into our first panel. And before I actually introduce our first panel, once again, I would like to remind everyone that, it was only in 2018 where really the world recognized that including refugees, designing and implementing the global refugee response would lead to a better and more sustainable policies, as we heard from Ms. Gillian Triggs. This idea was again enshrined in the Global Compact on Refugees, which really called on the states and relevant stakeholders to facilitate meaningful participation of refugees, ensuring our inclusion of perspectives on progress. So that's really, what this session is going to be about. We already heard through the opening remarks. We are going to be hearing and talking more about how meaningful participation is happening in practice. But before we do so, I would like to remind everyone in the room today of why we are here today discussing refugee participation. Why does it really matter? Refugees, again, around the world convened for the first time at the Global Summit of Refugees in 2018. But the refugee participation movement was really built on the shoulders of refugee leaders who really worked for decades to ensure that affected communities have a say in the policies that shape our futures. So again, I would like to echo and emphasize that, we refugees organized to do this work because current policies are not working and we need to do it better. And in 2021, for refugees, this is really a matter of life and death. The pandemic, we've seen it has impacted almost everyone. And it has put refugees' health and livelihood and education at risk. And while seeking asylum is a human right, it has been really under attack as countries really work to contain the virus. And we've seen it in many other countries. So although many of us do hope that the pandemic would ease, international tensions and lead to ceasefire conflicts and continue to rage, including in Syria, in Yemen, in Ukraine, in Ethiopia, and in Afghanistan, in many other parts of the world. Despite promises made in the Global Compacts of Refugees, the international community has failed really to protect people forced to flee from these conflicts. And again, in November this year alone, a 14-year-old Kurdish boy from Iraq froze to death. He trapped in the border zone between the Belarus and the Poland, and dozens of people, including a young girl, died trying to cross the English channel. And this really reminds us again, why we are here. We, the refugees, suffer the most from failed policies. And that is why we want to be involved in designing the solutions. And hence we have, fantastic speakers lined up through the panels. And with that, I would like to go and introduce our first panel. Our first panel is the topic is actually about moving from pledging to action. And we will be hearing from Miss Andira Kara, and my apology if I'm not pronouncing it right, from Kenya, lead researcher, LEARN project on refugee-led organizations in East Africa and the Middle East. We will also be hearing from Mr. Hannes Einsporn. He's the senior project manager migration, the global issues, Robert Bosch Institute Foundation. We will be then hearing from Ms. Shaza Al-Rehavi, who is the co-founder, steering committee member, and also the chairwoman of Global Refugee-Led Network and the co-founder of Global Independent Refugee Women Leaders. Then we will be hearing from Ms. Mariette Skuman, the director of Humanitarian Aid of the Netherlands, and then from Mr. Mohammed Ahmed, who is the program director, St. Andrews Refugee Services, and the member of the Resourcing Refugee Leadership Initiative. Once again, I would like to ask all the participants that if you want to know more about our speakers, you can see the bios that's being uploaded in the chat, and you will see more information. So with that, I would like to call on our first speaker, Ms. Andira Kara, and I would like to ask Mr. Andira Kara and Mr. Einsporn, representing the Bosch Foundation, to really talk about how they have been working together to build evidence around the added value of meaningful refugee participation. It would be really great to hear again about how LEARN address barriers to refugee meaningful participation in research design and analysis, and how Bosch Foundation would advise other private sector entities to build businesses case for partnering with RLOs. So first to you, Ms. Kara, and then to Mr. Hannes Einsporn.
Thank you. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Andira Kara, and I'm the Kenya lead researcher on a project looking at the work of refugee-led organization and initiatives. To support the development of more robust policy and practice on the role of refugee-led initiatives within refugee responses, we need to move from anecdote to evidence. And therefore, we are conducting a mapping and an examination of refugee-led initiatives across 4 countries in East Africa and 3 countries in the Middle East. And the research questions that we are asking focus on the nature and the scope of this refugee-led bodies across East Africa and Middle East, the impact of these bodies on displaced communities, and also the factors that condition this varied responses and impact. Something really critical about the research that I'm part of is that it's not outsiders coming to do this research, and not people from out of the region. And it's not just people within the region doing this research, but it's done by individuals with lived experience of forced displacement. And this is particularly important because as we speak about meaningful participation today, we don't refer to only policy and practice, but we're talking about refugee participation in research, building evidence that contributes to policy and practice. Refugee participation in research also leads to different results as we bring different understanding of the context in which we're doing the research. So far, we're in 3 months into the research, and the findings that we have from the mapping of these refugee-led initiatives is just to understand the differences on what may concern the scale of the activities, the registration, the funding, and also the leadership. And we've seen that these refugee-led initiatives take different shape, and they have great variety coming from a large scale RLOs that provide assistance and humanitarian assistance and protection to the refugee communities, to small organizations like women-led groups that focus on skill development. There are also variation in terms of their visibility, with some being active online in a global fora, and others are active in just their communities. The local environment also and the politics of the host states play a key role towards the refugee. These are refugee-led initiatives as they struggle to form and implement activities in more restrictive countries, for instance, like Tanzania and Ethiopia, and also countries in the Middle East, such as Jordan and Turkey. And after the mapping, we want to conduct an in-depth fieldwork to understand the impact of these RLOs. And we're working in 3 locations in each country in East Africa and in the Middle East. And we hope that this work contributes and will help us to move from anecdote to evidence by building an understanding of initiatives and organizations led by refugees, their impact on the refugee community, and also explaining the variation in what they do and their impact also. It is important as we address the policy and practice within the refugee-led initiatives, we do it on a solid base evidence. And for example, right now we're aware that the methodology and also the kind of approach we're taking is replicated by other studies, by other studying organizations, refugee-led organizations in Asian Pacific region. It is therefore really key, and I hope that evidence will contribute to progression of policy and practice and the role of RLOs. We're so much grateful to Bosch Foundation, to the Open Society Foundation, the Canada International Development Research Center, and others for supporting this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kara. Can we come to you, Mr. Einsporn?
Thank you so much, Najiba, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I can certainly share some of our experience from the philanthropic sector when it comes to supporting meaningful refugee participation. And what we do concretely at the Robert Bosch Foundation is we, in partnership with other philanthropic actors such as the Open Society Foundations or the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Global Wellbeing Fund, we do 2 main things. First, we want to build the evidence around the impact and the role of refugee-led organizations. And I'm very grateful to Andira and her colleagues for pursuing this work. And secondly, we directly fund refugee-led organizations in specific countries, but also at the global level. And I think the pandemic has really shown us and made visible what the role and the impact of refugee-led organizations can be. Refugee-led organizations fill important gaps in humanitarian responses, but I think it's fair to say in the many protracted refugee situations, we can assume that the role of refugee-led organizations is in particular more important given the scarce resources of international organization and international NGOs and governments. So in sum, I think refugee-led organizations from our perspective, they deserve greater recognition and support for their work. And there is increasing evidence that refugee-led organizations are nimbler, are more efficient, including because they're so close to the communities that they serve. So really, to your question, Najiba, on the business case for supporting refugee-led organizations, I think we as a community of funders obviously want to put our resources where they're most effectively and efficiently employed. And I think that's a strong case for refugee-led organizations. But we also want to align our funding with the values that we hold. And in particular, when we talk about accountability to the communities that we aim to support, this is another strong case. I think we have to be really cognizant and have to duly recognize the intricate environments that RLOs work in. And I think that's a particular important ask. I think we have to work with RLOs that in order for them to meet formal requirements. For instance, when it comes to legal registration, many of them are in informality, and we have to, rather than saying no to an organization that has a great vision and mission, we really need to work with them in order to allow them to meet these criteria. I think we can often jointly find ways and means to partner, and I think this is really sort of putting into practice the aspiration of having equitable partnerships. And I think in particular, our role of private funders, I think we can often play a vanguard role for the broader community of funders in building evidence around these innovative partnerships. So I would encourage many more private funders to come on board, and I would also I'm also looking forward for the dialogue between us as private funders and the public funders that are also in this call and going forward. So Najiba, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you to the organizers for the ability to speak to you today. Over to you, Najiba.
Okay, I had some difficulty unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Mr. Hannes. And with that, I would like to go to Ms. Alrihavi, who is the co-founder of the GRN, who put forward the pledge on meaningful participation, and Ms. Schumann as state signatory of the pledge. Can you share GRN's and the Netherlands' experience in advancing the implementation of the pledge on meaningful participation? What are some of the key lessons learned during the pandemic, and what are some of the key recommendations to further advance this pledge by 2023? So maybe we can go to Ms. Schumann and then to Shaza.
Thank you. Well, I think already this conversation this side event is a very strong testimony of the vitality of refugee-led conversations. Meaningful refugee participation needs to be systematic, institutionalized, and an integral part of policy design instead of predominantly ad hoc, as is still often the case. But that said, from a donor perspective, what hinders us to get there, to that meaningful refugee participation from the start? Really institutionalized and systematic. And you see three sets of challenges that we were confronted with. Accountability. For us, it's accountability not only to affected people, but also accountability to our taxpayers. And that can sometimes be in conflict. The second set is the dichotomy between technical efficiency versus meaningful inclusion. And the last one are issues around representativeness. So the Netherlands, we support refugees and host countries through a dedicated multi-annual funding instrument, a partnership with 5 multilateral organizations, UNHCR, UNICEF, ILO, World Bank, and IFC. And that's designed not only to fulfill our obligation on accountability to our own taxpayers and on technical efficiency, but also to enhance accountability to affected people and meaningful inclusion. So having made this important pledge back in 2019, this is how we have tried to turn that into action. First, I think starting at home. We entered into a unconscious bias training for the entire staff in my department. Then we tried to implement it through plans to systematically include refugee representatives in the design of our next programming cycle that begins in 2023. Obviously, also through our overall efforts to strengthen the localization agenda under the Grand Bargain and the Grand Bargain 2.0 with our partners. So this is also our first recommendation, to put the localization agenda, which for me really is to put the resilience and the agency of refugees and hosting communities at the heart of our interventions and ensure refugee-led organizations are systematically involved in policy and programming. And finally, we're using modern technologies to ensure that the voices of displaced populations are taken on board from the start and already now, also in our policy making, through our cooperation with UNICEF on their U-Report initiative and through Upinion. So maybe to focus for a short moment on the last example of Upinion. Upinion is a social enterprise based in the Netherlands that has the capacity to approach refugee and host community populations, conduct regular as well as interactive real-time surveys, and aggregate the results in concrete inputs for our programming, evaluations, and policies. So through Upinion, we are harnessing the power of technology and statistics to ensure that refugees' collective real-time feedback to ongoing policy discussions is considered representatives and thus pertinent and relevant. So in that way, affected populations can become participants in policy conversations instead of just being on the receiving end. And that would be our second recommendation. We need to get creative in overcoming the representativeness conundrum and stop using it as an excuse for structural exclusion. So we're encouraged by these experiences. We continue exploring this approach further, improving the technology and also expanding it, expanding the geographical scope of it. And we still have a long way to go on meaningful refugee participation by Global Refugee Forum 2023, but we're committed to anchoring this way of working, building on the agency and resilience of refugees, and gradually ensuring that refugees are structurally taken on board in our policy and programming choices.
Thank you. Shaza?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really grateful and thankful for UNHCR to being here today. Today, we are no longer asking ourselves if refugee participation is possible, but instead we are exploring how can achieve that. Unfortunately, despite some progress made, refugees continue to face significant quantitative and qualitative barriers to meaningful participation. In 2019, refugees represented only 2% of participants at the GRF. When HLOM supposed to happen in person, only 10 refugees out of 500 participants were invited, again, 2%. Also, when we are included in global forums, we are often sidelined into an advisory role rather than given direct participatory access. We faced always the question about our accountability and legitimacy. These examples are not meant to point a finger, but rather to point out the system-wide issue. Refugees are still not treated as a peer in policy-making spaces. Notwithstanding these challenges, in 2019, we have seen the successful implementation of meaningful refugee participation that can be modeled and scaled. In 2019, GRN launched the Refugee Participation Pledge, the first pledge made towards the GRF. This pledge called for the support the meaningful participation of refugees in decisions that affect their lives, and has been signed over 17 actors, including Canada, Denmark, Australia, and Netherlands. And we look forward to seeing more actors signing of the upcoming HLOM. Drafted uses the principle of the Gerd Brangen's participation revolution, the 8 gender and diversity framework, and the Sustainable Development Goals agenda to leave not one behind. The pledge has led to the formation of an ad hoc multi-stakeholders coalition that works together to advocate the meaningful refugee participation agenda. Also, GRN led the initiative to increase direct refugee engagement at the ATCR. GRN Network, a refugee the world, it's around the world in 6 regions. It's sure that the meaningful engagement in policy access is happened. We regularly map and connect our laws, and we are coordinating refugees advocacy regionally and globally. So far, meaningful refugee participation is done well. It's produced innovative and effective outcomes. While COVID-19 made the global response for the refugee crisis more urgent, also it demonstrates an importance of RLO's role in the response. With the traditional humanitarian actors facing new travel restrictions and capacity limitation, refugee-led organizations filled the gap and provide life-saving assistance to both refugee and host community. There is a lot of examples that can be shared here, but due to time, I will not. As GRN, we are recommending 3 concrete ways that international community can make GCR call for meaningful refugee participation reality. First, we invite to join Refugee Participation Pledge and help us advocate to change the system for more inclusive of affected communities. Second, we urge you to increase direct RLO's access to flexible funding, particularly to help women and girls, youth, disabled, LGBT, and other often excluded refugee groups. Third, we implore you to advocate for secure, equal, quality health treatment for forcibly displaced people, including access to COVID-19 vaccine. Today, GRN launched a report, Power and Emergence, the State of Refugee Participation. We can share that with you in the chat. The last lesson that we can share as a GRN from our journey towards refugee participation or meaningful participation is that our community is extremely powerful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaza. And that really brings us down to Mr. Ahmed. STARS is one of the refugee-led organizations that's leading on the implementation of the Resourcing Refugee Leadership Initiative, which has the ambitious and inspiring goal of distributing $40 million to 45 RLOs across 10 countries in the next 5 years. Mr. Ahmed, can you share with us how the initiative has built trust with donors, something that we've just been hearing from Shaza, how important it is for our RLOs to have access to funding in order for them to become sustainable. So would you be able to tell us and share with us how the initiative has built trust with donors and plans to ensure RLO to RLO paid forward funding model? As a well-established organizations in Cairo, what would be your key recommendations to smaller refugee-led organizations willing to grow and wanting to build their capacity in a sustainable manner?
Thank you so much. I would first like to talk about some of the necessary steps, I think, for the international organizations and donors wanting to partner with or fund RLOs. So I think there are 3 main steps to do this. The first thing is the willingness to accept that the current system is failing. INGOs tend to work with projects, not with communities. The system is basically functioning on a colonial model basis. What we often get is projects designed in the global West and delivered in the global South with no input from local populations who these interventions are meant to serve. So the willingness to accept this failure necessitates a second step. fundamental change in policy, guidelines, reporting requirements, and organizational culture generally. It necessitates the shift, a shift of thinking. The last point, I would say, that INGOs should have the role to help strengthening the technical capacities of RLOs instead of attempting to provide direct assistance. The work is already being done by refugees informally. So what's needed is for these RLOs to be properly resourced. Now, the Resourcing Refugee Leadership Initiative, RRLI, is already realizing this and already making positive connections worldwide. We will help build networks with RLOs and donors to connect. We will also help RLOs strengthen their technical capacities. We will help them function within their local avenues. Within our initiative, we believe in being flexible and adaptable, but also accountable and transparent. When it comes to designing and implementing interventions, we believe that displaced people should not only have a seat at the table. Displaced people own the table. Within our initiative, we don't expect less from refugee leaders or RLOs, but we do understand that we need to support more. Regarding your second question, I would say to my fellow RLOs that change is coming, and it seems more inevitable now than ever. So it will take time, it will take some time, it will take effort and thought. There will be challenges, but we need to keep in mind that our solutions are far more impactful, cost-effective, and immediate than the current system. As RLOs, I would say we need to continue doing the good work we do. We need to show our ability to run projects successfully. We need to show the quality and range of services, the wraparound nature of the services we provide. We need to continue being responsive to the community needs and also responsive to donors as well. And finally, I would say having a global movement for refugee rights cannot and will not be successful unless it has refugee leadership. Long ago, we accepted that a women's organization could not be run successfully without the involvement and leadership of women. And yet we are still willing to accept that humanitarian development and assistance for refugees can be run and led by people without the lived experience of forced displacement. And if we do believe in a refugee rights movement, the only good movement can be refugee leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed. And that brings us to the end of our first panel. And I would like to thank all the speakers and presenters to our first panel and for your fantastic and excellent contribution. So I would like to go straight into our panel 2 and introduce you to our second panel, which is going to talk about localizing the global compacts on refugees. And for this panel, we will be hearing from another diverse set of fantastic speakers, and they include Miss Lilian Mukidi, who's the founder of Umoja for Africa. Then we'll be hearing from Miss Alex De Villeras, from Urban Refugees, Executive Director, Xavier Project Consultant. Once again, if you would like to see the bios of our speakers, please do refer in the chat as they have been uploaded. So my first question goes to Ms. Mukidi. You fled your country in 1999 at the climax of a civil war to find safe haven in South Africa. Upon your arrival in the country, however, you've noticed a gender divide and how societal arrangements have left women in the margins of the economic life of the country. Faced with this new reality, you have decided to create Umoja for Africa, which aims to empower all disadvantaged women in South Africa, regardless of their nationality. So with that, I really want to ask you how your work empowering women in South Africa contributed to social cohesion and improved the preparedness of the community to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, as a woman leader yourself, what is the key recommendation on promoting inclusive refugee leadership you would like to leave with us today? Ms. Mukidi.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Najiba, for the question. I will start first just to emphasize about women, and I will start by saying that Africa has a history and culture where women were kept in a back seat when it comes to development. While men are elevated to position of power, this unfortunate has led to illiteracy among women, lack of skills, and other factors. Africa is our land, and we can make the best of this continent. By being united and raising women, we can change the prospect of our people, regardless of the color of their skin, their background, and where they come from. I'll jump to, we are a group of refugee women who stand for unity and transformation. Our vision, as you said, it's empowering all disadvantaged women through training, skills transfer, and income generating activities. As some of the pictures are below, I'll go to our challenges due to the time. We know that unity is our strength, and we're standing for unity, and we will fight for unity. Some of the challenges we're facing in South Africa is the high level of unemployment, capacity to offer free training, easy access to documentation, and there's urgent need for digital literacy for women, as we know that everything is online, all the applications are online. How do we address them? Through beginners training, beginners and advanced sewing programs, barista training, leadership training for women and girls, gender-based violence workshop for women and girls, income generating programs, and job creation through our CMT. And we also have a coffee shop where we create jobs, future skills training as we're planning. We planning to have hospitality, beauty therapy, and that is just also very interesting, plumbing and electrical training for women. We also planning to have a workshop and training into entrepreneurship. Leave no one behind is our COVID-19 theme. That's where Umoja came to life and people come to know Umoja. From our first wave, the first wave response, we donated more than 30,000 masks in communities where Umoja, as refugee women, we went to the refugee community, to the host country organization and communities and distributed masks. Then our second wave, it was back to school. We donated 2,500 reusable PPE and PPE in schools and shelters. Third wave, this time it was the South African National Lottery. They heard about what we're doing and come to us and contribute of 1.5 million for us to distribute 2,000 food parcels and PPE. And that was a mind-blowing, and people were crying for the decent food parcel we gave to them. Our recommendation, we would love to equip women and strengthen their leadership role and control over the decisions that affect their lives, family, or community. Educate a woman, you educate a nation. Expand our business investment and expected to set up a clothing and accessory factory, which will create jobs to many women. Support of the economic empowerment skills training, encourage social cohesion program, and support the platform of refugee girls leadership. Thank you so much, Najiba.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mukidi. So now we're coming to Ms. de Villiers, urban refugees, and again, the informal network of like-minded organizations such as Xavier Project, Same Skies, Alp Resilience, and STARS have been really developing several initiatives to strengthen the capacity of RLOs and provide direct funding to RLOs through grants. So as an NGO, I really want to ask you, Ms. de Villiers, what are some of the key recommendations that you would like to share to promote equal partnerships and meaningful participation of refugee leaders in humanitarian sector?
Thank you, Najiba. Hello, everyone. In the past years, we've seen the idea of refugee participation gradually take up more space and be streamlined as meaningful refugee participation. But we wonder how this can really lead to self-reliance as defined by the Global Compact on Refugees. How can we expect refugees to assert their rights and be actors of their own lives during and after a crisis if we don't give proper credit to their ideas and decisions, if we only expect them to take part in our initiatives and not vice versa? Refugee-led organizations are increasingly responding to the needs of refugees and filling in more and more gaps left by local governments and INGOs, as many of the previous panelists have highlighted. So now the role of the international community should be to amplify this by going beyond participation, by actually letting refugees lead responses. So across the world, our network of like-minded organizations is experimenting with different capacity strengthening and participatory approaches to support this transition. It's not about capacity building as if nothing existed before, not chalk and talk training on specific skills or competencies which mostly relate to compliance standards, not predefined objectives based on our own conception of success. We believe that our role is about capacity strengthening because by getting together to support others in their community, RLOs show they already have capacity. And capacity sharing to recognize what refugees can share with each other and with the rest of the aid community. For us, this capacity strengthening and sharing is embedded in every step of a project, from vision setting and assessment to evaluation, to progressively shift to refugee-led responses. So what does this mean? It's trying to understand the needs of refugees outside any sectoral funding, co-designing solutions with refugees based on their own ideas and propositions, and helping them to make their own decisions instead of asking them to justify why they did this or that. In doing so, we face the following key barriers. The first is related to ourselves, acting as implementers. International organizations and agencies often perpetuate the status quo by not treating RLOs as genuinely equal partners. We use them as subcontractors to projects. We fail to include them in coordination mechanisms oftentimes. And refugees rarely hold senior leadership positions. So in such conditions, there can be no proper capacity strengthening. We recommend that implementers rethink their approach to success and progressively shift initiatives and decision-making power within their organizations to refugees themselves. It's a constant effort of self-questioning, and we should rely on each other and on our partner RLOs to help us do it. Secondly, funding is generally constrained within results frameworks based on a Global North agenda and narrowed down by the organizations and agencies it goes through before actually getting to RLOs. As a result, RLOs are left to do as they are asked within set targets. So we recommend that funders progressively fund RLOs directly, including with funding dedicated to refugees' assessments of their needs. In such a way, refugees could assess themselves if and how international expertise could support them, rather than the other way around. Thirdly, refugees continue to struggle to register their organizations and obtain work permits in some host countries, which strongly hinders the development of any refugee-led initiative. So we recommend that host governments continue to reduce these administrative barriers, as many of them have begun to do, so that refugee leaders can maximize their role as providers of social services in refugee communities and more broadly within their hosting countries. If these barriers were overcome, if refugees could address their own needs on a wider scale, then we believe that they could really become self-reliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. de Villiers and also Ms. Mukidi. We've been already hearing very much of excellent recommendations that's being put forward by the speakers so far today. So I would like to remind you all again, all of these recommendations are actually captured in the Menti, which will be active throughout the session. So I invite you all to view the recommendations and rate them by priority through the mentee at any point during the event today. And again, you will see the link in the chat box and the instruction in terms of how it could be used. So now we're going to come down to our third panel, and our third panel is going to be talking about cultivating new pledges and planning for the future. For this panel, we will be hearing from Ms. Rez Gardi, who is a co-managing director, Refugees Seeking Equal Access at the Table, RSEIT. Then we'll be hearing from Mr. Mark Benzel, the Councillor Government of Canada. And then it will be followed by Ms. Seyran Khalili, who's the reference group of Refugee Reconnect speakers, and then Ms. Noella Bekukeba Ilunga, my apology if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, from Zambia, Daffy, president of Daffy Club, DRC, and the member of Tertiary Refugee Student Network. So once again, if anyone is interested to know more about our speakers, you will be able to see the bios that have been uploaded in the chat box, and you will be able to see more information there. Ms. Gardi, I would like to start with you. RSEIT's goal is really to develop mechanisms to implement meaningful refugee participation in national decision-making in different countries. So how can a refugee seat help countries create participatory mechanisms that are responsive to their own context? In terms of follow-up to this meeting, again, what would you like to see happening next?
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks very much, Ms. Moderator Najiba. Over the last few years, a prominent theme of UN agreements on refugees has been a commitment to enhancing the role of refugees in the making and implementation of policies that affect us. As articulated in paragraph 34 of the Global Compact on Refugees, responses are most effective when they actively and meaningfully engage those that they're intended to protect and assist. Over the last few years, we have come a very long way. There has been an increased recognition of the value of meaningful refugee participation and acknowledgement that refugee engagement contributes to solutions that are sustainable and more impactful, innovative forms of advocacy, and the development of global and national policies that are closer to the reality on the ground. Refugee situations have increased in scope, scale, and complexity, and this necessitates new and innovative methods for protection, assistance, and solutions. While the status quo continues to work for some issues, large-scale refugee movements and protracted refugee situations persist around the world, indicating that things must change. Meaningful refugee participation is not the end in itself. It is a means to achieve an end, which is a better and more efficient global refugee response system. The current pandemic has further exacerbated risks to already vulnerable populations around the world. As a result, the vulnerabilities and marginalizations refugees experienced prior to the pandemic have been exacerbated, further increasing the protection risks. Yet refugees, like always, stepped up as the first responders to protect one another and to provide services to their communities when the international actors were limited in their mobility and access. This experience confirmed that refugees are critical yet underappreciated actors in the international humanitarian response system. We are now at a fundamental and transformative period. As demonstrated by the number of states and actors who have voiced support for meaningful refugee participation, the global community recognizes the importance of meaningful refugee participation. So now we must transition from the if to the how. How can we implement meaningful refugee participation? What does it look like? RSEIT seeks to respond to this challenge. We are a global initiative and coalition of partners from academia, international foundations, and policymakers led by refugees who are working to enhance the effectiveness of global refugee responses by co-designing mechanisms to amplify refugee leadership ecosystems and increase the participation of refugees at state levels in a meaningful, sustainable, and transformative way. Meaningful refugee participation occurs when refugees from diverse backgrounds have sustained influence in all fora where decisions, policies, and responses that impact their lives are being designed, implemented, and measured in a manner that is accessible, broad, informed, safe, free, and supported. With unprecedented numbers of displaced people, we need to work together now more than ever to come up with practical, effective responses to displacement through multidimensional, multidisciplinary, and intersectional approaches. The call for nothing about us without us is a call to make space for us to use our skills, perspectives, and experiences to contribute directly to the future of solutions. Thus, we urge all stakeholders, states, UNHCR, and NGOs to have more active and sustainable participation of refugees within their structures and throughout all of their activities by prioritizing the development of mechanisms to institutionalize the meaningful participation of refugees with an aim of enhancing the global refugee response system as the end goal. RC is working with states to do so, in particular to include refugees as members of their national delegations to all meetings of the global refugee regime, as demonstrated by Canada since 2019. We're proud to have been working with a number of states, the United States, Germany, and many others over this year. And now we're incredibly proud to share that the United States and Germany have taken bold steps to enhance meaningful refugee participation by including refugee advisors in their official delegations this week. This marks the first time for Germany and the United States to include refugees in their state delegations to any global refugee meeting. This news is an exciting next step in recognizing the benefits of meaningful refugee participation around the globe and working in partnership towards enhancing the global refugee response system. We pledge to work with any state that wants to move from the if to the how to co-design mechanisms to enhance meaningful refugee participation. And we pledge that by the next GRF in 2023, there will be 20 states with refugee advisors as part of their state delegation. So work with us. We've extensively discussed the benefits of meaningful refugee participation. It is now time to implement it. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you very much, Rez. That now brings us to Canada. Mr. Banzet, Canada has been championing meaningful refugee participation, and we also heard from Rez. You've been championing meaningful refugee participation even before the Global Compacts on Refugees. And more recently, Canada has been exploring with other countries and RLOs themselves on how they can come forward and support refugee leadership. So can you please share with us the findings and the key recommendations from those efforts to make refugee participation a reality until the next GRF, the Global Refugee Forum, please?
Thank you. And this topic is an important one for Canada, not only because we pledged at the 2019 Global Refugee Forum to support the meaningful participation of refugees in processes and decisions that directly affect their lives, but especially because it enhances the effectiveness, accountability, and legitimacy of our collective responses to situations of forced displacement. Canada is encouraged by the experience with refugee-led initiatives that were shared today, that have been shared, just like what Rez just said before, and hearing others such as Learn. Hearing, understanding, and actively considering the lived experience of refugees, including and particularly those of women and girls in all their diversity, delivers better outcomes by unleashing the power of relevant contextual knowledge, valuable and deployable skills, and the shift in power dynamic in response, protection, and durable solutions that reflect the needs and aspirations of refugees and refugee communities, noting that this access to participation must be broad in order to make it accessible to diverse voices. However, in recent UNHCR analysis, indicates that only 53 out of 1,579 pledges made in 2019 have a particular focus on meaningful refugee participation. This means that there still is work to do to build momentum, but also that there is still significant untapped opportunity. To this end, on November 12th, Canada was proud to have co-hosted with UNHCR an informal meeting of member states to discuss and take stock of progress towards meaningful refugee participation. This meeting was attended by states representing humanitarian donors, resettlement countries, and host communities, which have either made a pledge on meaningful refugee participation or are positively engaged on the issue. In our discussion, a number of common threads emerged. One is the relevance of a human rights-based lens, where we not only do no harm, but also consider the principle of nothing about us without us. Another is the value of practical action on inclusion, where we acknowledge that while voice is important, it is just the beginning. We also acknowledge that there are challenges to overcome. This includes shifting the narrative away from refugees as victims or heroes, but instead as powerful actors with valuable knowledge, experience, expertise, and skills, as well as parts of our communities with needs and aspirations. It includes addressing the difficulty for many states to work directly with refugee-led organizations at the grassroots. It also includes getting past institutional constraints to build in effective consultation mechanisms, whether to inform policymaking or to define project implementation at the field level. However, it was also clear from our discussion that there were lots of lessons to share, which underscored the need to work together. As a means of building dialogue and supporting the goal of enabling substantial influence over the parties and outcomes, Canada, along with other states, met with refugee organizations on December 9th to share perspectives and to listen. We heard of the importance of working together as equal partners and of increasing representation in refugee policy forums and UNHCR governance. We heard of the need for protection and greater access to basic services and for inclusion, particularly for especially marginalized groups. We updated on progress being made, discussed the links between meaningful refugee participation and the localization agenda, and identified the relevant models that can be drawn upon to shape collaboration. These efforts are needed both in the domestic context, in donor, resettlement, and host countries, and in meaningful refugee participation in the governance of the international refugee system, where refugees have status, standing, and space to speak and act. For Canada, in line with our feminist approach, building a sustainable system for participation includes institutionalizing consultation and policy-making processes, and participation in delegations to international refugee protection meetings, including UNHCR's 2020 and 2021 executive committee meetings and the annual tripartite consultations on resettlement. We are pleased to formally include representation by individuals with lived refugee experience in our virtual delegation to this high-level officials meeting. This engagement also extends to refugee inclusion and participation in the functioning of the international refugee system. For example, Canada's Together for Learning campaign, which promotes quality education and lifelong learning for refugees, other forcibly displaced and host community children and youth, directs $40 million in funding to support refugee-led organizations in sub-Saharan Africa. Taken together, input from CSO consultations and our refugee delegates have been instrumental to ensure we are advocating for effective and durable solutions. Likewise, building the capacity of refugee-led organizations to advocate and deliver strengthens results, encourages sustainability, and helps realize commitments in the grand bargain to support and empower local actors. Canada is happy to share our positive experience in engaging and building sustainable partnerships with refugees, and also looks forward to further engaging with partners and stakeholders to advance meaningful participation in the lead up to the next Global Refugee Forum in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banzet. So now we turn to Ms. Khalili. Could you please tell us more about how participating in the Reconnect conference impacted your activities in your country and at regional level as refugee leaders? And also, if you could share with us, what have you learned from it, and what would you be also sharing as your recommendation to improve this and other similar processes? And if I can kindly ask you to keep it 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Najiba, and to the UNHCR for having me today. By participating, one of the main impact that I'm here today. I'm engaged in this conference, having the opportunity to share my reflections. We have worked a lot together, and based on the recommendations we have as refugee leaders, we have already taken up these in practice, having value for the individual and a big impact for the communities. The conference was called the Refugee Reconnect in light of the need to reconnect as a community after a challenging period of COVID-19, which had disproportionately affected a community of refugees and stateless people in the region. In order to ensure the meaningful participation and leadership of refugees and stateless people throughout the event, we were a core group of refugees from Bulgaria, Cyprus, Georgia, Greece, Norway, and Spain. And we agreed to act as a reference group to further advise on topics and format and support the facilitation of the event. Our group, we started to work together since July this year, and we met virtually actually once a week to discuss and plan the event. We were all the refugee leaders who we planned, we delivered, and we facilitated every step of the Refugee Reconnect conference. This included also both the design, the conducting, and moderating all the sessions. I would say that the main sort of impact it has is that the conference provided a space for refugee-led organizations to reconnect with each other in exchanging the best practices that have been initiated during the COVID-19. The interactive discussions were mainly focused on key issues faced by Europe-based refugee communities, but it also explored how COVID-19 impacted everyone in different ways. I would also highlight that through participating in the Reconnect conference, we explored 3 themes. It was access to labor market, civic engagement, and together with refugee leadership and meaningful participation. These topics have been identified as key areas for meaningful inclusion of refugees and stateless persons. So if refugees get involved in any activities, that is civic engagement, and at the regional level as refugee leaders, this involves, for example, participating in meetings or forums such as here today, discussing community issues. It's a simple concept where we're working together to make things better. And I've learned the importance of seeing the situation from a wider perspective, working together. So to do this, one of my recommendations based on a Reconnect conference would be that we also have now started with trainings and trainings on active meaningful participation, democratic governance, and civic engagement to organizations to both involved in policy and decision making on a local and on a European level. So this is something that we are now working on to provide. I would say that one of the recommendations that we have based on a report is that is to maintain and support regional network in Europe, to continue capacity building for refugee-led initiatives, and to promote visibility of refugee voices in the policy forums. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to our last speaker for this panel, Ms. Noella. As a member of Tertiary Refugee Students Network and a young refugee leader, how can meaningful participation mechanisms and pledges made at the Global Refugee Forum be more inclusive of different refugee groups, including youth? Would you also be able to share with us what is the role of the tertiary education in ensuring youth development and participation in decision-making?
Okay, thank you very much, Najiba, for that question. So first and foremost, I'd like to start by saying that refugee students and youth should be involved systematically at international, regional, and national levels. Their inputs and efforts can contribute tremendously when we are planning for the future. They need to have an enabling environment to engage, especially at policy level, both international and in their host community. We don't only see host countries as our place of safety and peace, but also our very own place of opportunity. So basically, refugee students and youths should be involved at all levels. More so, we want opportunities, education, employment, and inclusion. Furthermore, I would also love to state the fact that the aspect of employment is regarded as one of the ways of enabling refugees to integrate in the host country. However, this isn't an easy process because for one to be employed, they must be in possession of specific documents, for example, the work permits. And some of these work permits are quite pricey, and this disadvantages most of the forcibly displaced. So job placements and job opportunities is very difficult. Even those with DAFI scholarships and DAFI alumni stay at home because there are no jobs. There is discrimination against the refugees at all levels. People seeking asylum can be outstanding employees if we work together to lift the barriers that come with being employed. Furthermore, we all know the evidence, education and self-reliance empower people affected by forced displacement immensely. Yet, young people across the 33 countries in Africa, Asia, Europe, MENA, and Latin America reported considerable barriers to access quality education and joining the labor market, including access to the internet and reliable information. For example, an opportunity to access a scholarship. We want opportunities and not help as a whole. So basically, tertiary education refers to all formal post-secondary education, including public and private universities, colleges, tertiary training, institutes, and vocational schools. Tertiary education is necessary for the discovery, proper dissemination, and application of knowledge. They are able to compete with other countries on a level playing field. It also offers a wider opportunity of career choices to choose from. For example, I, who is speaking today, I am a mass communication student and I'm able to, interact today because of the education that I have attained. So the importance of tertiary education cannot be overemphasized. It is a backbone of society and a major driver behind economic growth and personal financial freedom. Quickly into my recommendations that I would make. First and foremost, reserve a permanent seat for us. Regular, continuous, and meaningful participation will enable us to hold host and donor governments accountable to their global pledges and policy commitments and to ensure their translation in national programs and policies in relevant and specific spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And with that, that brings us to the discussions to all panels. And I know we ran out over time. I would like to thank all the panelists for their rich contribution today and really hand over quickly to Hafsa for our closing remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you, Najiba. And thank you to all the previous speaker and panelists. And looking back where we were in the past, on this journey of the meaningful participation of refugees, we have come a long way. In the past, let alone of meaningful participation, just to be on the table was a challenge for us in many ways. Like myself, many refugees from host countries and refugee camps have to take many risks. That includes taking the security risks for ourselves and also for our loved ones back home just to be on the table. When refugees participated in the past, we did that by compromising our hours of work without being compensated or acknowledged for our contribution, expertise, or time, while we not only have the responsibility of our day-to-day survival, but also for our families and loved ones. In many cases, it still is the same. While I appreciate how far we have come, as a reminder to how far we still have to go on this journey, I would like to mention this fact. As of now, less than 5% of pledges have a particular focus on meaningful participation, and 63% of the pledging entities on meaningful participation were organizations led by forcibly displaced people themselves and NGOs. As much as the experience that refugees have to go through is traumatic and unjust, and I also think it is also the very own reason why refugees and people with lived experience must be on the decision-making tables. Because as the person who was born as a stateless person, who have lived as an undocumented migrant, asylum seekers, and now as a former refugee, I believe that no one will ever know or understand the journey of refugees and their needs as the way refugees do. And I also would like to highlight that every refugee has a voice, and they have the ability to raise their own voice if the means and supports are given to do so. And therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to urge everyone to change the narrative of being the voices of someone else into passing the mic to the refugees directly, so they can speak for themselves and let their voice inform and guide our practices when it comes to promoting and protecting the rights of refugees. That includes the meaningful participation as well. And I hope this event has given us the opportunity to reevaluate what does meaningful participation means to the refugees, to the state, to NGOs, to INGOs through their lens. To be also aware of the diversity among the refugees and the different barriers and challenges that the refugees face to participate meaningfully. To reflect if we are incorporating the value of leaving no one behind in this space. If not, why? And how can we ensure the inclusive, respectful, and fair participation of refugees from all backgrounds, such as age, gender, disability, and sexual identity, as well as refugees from different geopolitical backgrounds? To also empower and support not only refugee and POC-led organizations, but also refugee-led initiatives from the refugee camps and host countries. To consider how do we practice not only responsibility sharing, but also authority sharing between the refugees and others involved in the sector. So moving forward, we would like to call upon NGOs, INGOs, academia, UN agencies, and the stakeholders involved to collaborate to promote meaningful refugee participation and to support the legal registration of POC-led organizations in their host country as a whole of society approach. We hope the recommendations made today will fit into the HLOM outcome documents, and this event is one of the many more constant engagements we will have to promote the meaningful participation of refugees, to empower the refugee-led organization, to encourage and support refugee-led initiatives in the refugee camps and host country. Thank you all for your participation in today's event, and I have one last announcement to make before I end my closing remark. The next side events on translating principle to practical actions, academic solidarity sharp with refugees, is happening at 3:15 until 4:30 Central European time, right after this session, if people would like to join. And thank you all again.